morning, bom dia. Well, after such a wonderful introduction by Stefano, I will have a very difficult time to keep you awake, and especially that I am speaking before the coffee break. I have been an academic teacher for more than 30 years, but I have never spoken to such a big crowd. This number of 8,000 people online seems to be very appealing, so thank you, Jerónimo Martins, for this challenge to me. And please forgive me if I am a little bit too nervous and stressed about this number. It was mentioned that the title of the presentation is Farming with Trees, or Not Against Trees. But what Stefano mentioned, in order to take any action and to do these actions in a wise way, that would be a good thing to know why we are doing that. And my main message, because before I will start talking about some small issues regarding agroforestry and other solutions, would be to appreciate the value of trees and appreciate the value of forest. As it was has already mentioned, we are becoming more and more detached from the nature. It's quite easy to show an example that the recent research on the perception of forest by Europeans shown, for example, that 21% of Polish citizens claim that if you want to produce something out of wood, you don't have to cut the tree. And we are in such an environment. If somebody from the big city is asked where the milk comes from, well, it comes from Żabka or Dolce Pingu. So that's the moment we have to really think about showing the forest, showing the trees, and showing them importance, and probably there is no better way to talk to people than showing them the value. People are going to do many things to get money or any value out of it. We are not only talking about the value, the monetary value, but we are also talking about value which is difficult to be expressed in dollars, euros, or other currency. If we are talking about things like friendship, love, cooperation, well, it has a value. But how to price it in the currency, we really don't know. This is another view of our Mother Earth. We saw the picture also in the Stefano's presentation. This is something to show you that we are blue planet, but we have also many green spots. And these green spots are of our interest because this is most probably trees and forests and other ecosystems that our life depends on. And if you look at the reprocessing of this data coming from the space, and this is the picture from European Space Agency, you can clearly see that this green color appears all over the globe. We have forests everywhere, and this intensity of green here shows so-called growing stock volume, the number that foresters use for showing how much wood is out there in the ecosystem. And here you can see that we have extremely valuable tropical forests in South America, Africa, and in South Asia. And we also have very large forests in the northern hemisphere, maybe not as productive in terms of cubic meters per hectare, but very important from the economic and ecological perspective. So we are going to talk about forests, and everybody more or less knows what forest is. And we are coming from different countries. We see different forests, and the question is what really the forest is. And there is really no single good formal definition that can tell us what the forest is. And this is also quite a difficult issue if we are talking about forests and trees, because people from Poland understand it different than people from Portugal, and they yet understand it different than people from, for example, Colombia. So this is why this is more about forests and trees than forests and forestry as such. This is one of the examples of the definitions of the forest that came from FAO. You don't have to read it, and you don't have to even show what's there, but what's important that definition of forest always says about some area, sometimes small, sometimes big, Here we have half a hectare. In Poland, it's 0.1 hectare. The second thing, that there is some sort of a tree living there. INFAO uses this 5 meter as a threshold, and has to be in some sort of community. So this is not a single tree, but some sort of the canopy cover. And the second part of this definition is that this is not including land that is predominantly used for other purposes. So first of all, agriculture and urbanization. We already mentioned about the value, and if we ask somebody, what is the value of the forest? What is the value of the tree? This is probably the first easiest way of explaining that, well, the simplest approach. Let's think of trees or forests as wood or other commodities that forests produce. And this is only a tiny small part of the reality, because we have so-called forest functions. This is what we use for classification. Humans are those creatures that try to classify everything back and forth in vertical and horizontal position. And one of these most important practical functions is the economic functions. And this wood, these commodities are included in these functions that we can put value on. So producing raw material, wood, for construction industries, for packaging, for paper, that's obviously. Non-timber forest products, this is also a huge amount of economical value. We are talking about mushroom, about berries, about raisins, about herbs, honey, medicinal plants, all these things that we can really use for humans. Game management, venison is popular in many places in the world. In some places, it's also very important from the point of view of the survival of people. So yes, this is also economic function, sustainable hunting. Economic function, well, everybody who lives in forests or works with forests and trees, they have to get a job there. They have to produce, process, provide services. So this definitely employment and income is something that comes from the forest, and this is also part of the economic functions. And more we talk about the renewable energy sources. In some parts of the world, this is the basic, the only source of heating and possibility of cooking things. But we're in more civilized, more developed countries, we speak more and more about the sustainable use of biomass for energy, which is obviously, as always, full of discussions and full of different approaches. However, if we look at trees and forests only from the point of view of this material stuff we can get out of it, that's like talking about, let's say, charity by the amount of euros or dollars we spend for these gifts or for this help for people. And we don't count things that are even more important, like people want to be seen, want to be appreciated, they want to feel that they have help from somebody, they can count on somebody. So that's the same with forests and trees. Something that comes from the forest, and this is also part of the economic functions. And more we talk about the renewable energy sources. In some parts of the world, this is the basic, the only source of heating and possibility of cooking things. But we're in more civilized, more developed countries, we speak more and more about the sustainable. We are talking not about just commodities that come from the forest, but we have a whole bunch of other ecological functions. And as you can see, there is very many of them. And this is just the first slide with these functions. But what's important, it's always something we don't think about on our everyday life. What Stefano mentioned, this plant blindness, it's also about these functions we call the ecological functions. We breathe because we have oxygen, and without plants, we cannot breathe. Carbon sequestration to fight climate change is something which is extremely important. Even if we take our discussion out of climate change issues, well, the climate regulation is something that absolutely is out of any discussion. Increased humidity, stabilization of temperature, the local conditions we live in, this is definitely something which is very important. And this place we are in right now, it's a good example of it. We are in the middle of a big city, and this place has completely different climate, more useful, much nicer for people, especially in the summertime, than 2 kilometers from here. Soil protection, extremely important. Extremely important function we tend to forget about, and we are always very surprised about huge landslides, big tragedies going across the world. Well, because people simply cut the trees, and this is why it happened. Water retention and purification. We need water, we need clean water, and in many places, in most places, the water sources for cities are located in the forested areas, but any water that comes also to the ocean can be filtered and is filtered by the forest. Stefano mentioned a lot about the biodiversity role. There is a huge amount of species out there. Many of them are unknown, but I'm pretty much sure that sooner or later we will need these plants for something, for medicines or for some other purposes. Let's keep them because we have many things to discover for our future. And yeah, many other things. I just simply wanted to show you that this is really very important issues. Not just production, not just dollars or euros coming from the commodities, but all other stuff. More and more, especially for those who live in the cities, there is a need for recreation and for better health and better life. And as long as the percentage of population in the cities will be increasing, this recreational and health-related functions will be increasing. And this is third group of functions we call social and cultural functions. I'm not showing that to you to teach you something or something like that, but simply I want to show you that the amount of services and products and other functions that are provided by trees and forests, it's much larger than just production we can think of. So basically, if you think a little bit stronger about that, this is not about 1.6, or Stefano mentioned 2 billion people who rely directly on forests. This is not about those who are using any products coming from the forest, but really the role of forests for preserving the planet as such is very important to all of us. There is a very nice saying or expression which is called the intrinsic value of the forest. Forests are not valuable because they are providing something to us, because we manage it and we extract something out of it, but the existence of the forest itself is something that gives us a lot, not only to humans, but simply to the planet. How to value different functions of forests, this is a very tricky stuff. I'm showing this slide coming from last year publication by Dolander and Lundmark, only to show you that people try to evaluate functions of the forest using different methods like market prices, replacement costs, stated preference, travel cost method, avoided costs, benefit transfer, you name them. So the whole bunch of different academic discussions about that, but people do try to do that because for some reason that people simply claim that this is important. And this is something to show you that there are not only scientists who do care about evaluation of the forest of the functions of the forest, but we have also international organization here, but we also have, let's say, Boston Consulting Group. This is somebody who is working for profit, but they are also putting a lot of effort into showing what is the value of different functions of the forest. And this is very difficult to show what is the real world, but the message I wanted to pass here is the following. If you look at the proportions of what trees and forests give us as humans, up to 20%, these are economic values, economic functions, production, and these things we can use as commodities. If we look at the ecological functions, this is times 3, times 4, and this is average of different studies. If you look at the Boston Consulting Group report, they are saying that if you look at the total value of the forest, it's $150 trillion, twice as much as the whole stock market, and the ecological values account for as much as 90%. It's not about the numbers, it's about the proportions. Production is just 10, 20%, and the majority of the value of the forest is more than just commodities. And if you put on top of this forest map from European Space Agency the value of the ecosystem services provided, you can clearly see that those places where the forests are, these are the most valuable ecosystems, the most valuable places on the earth, and these are those places that really require attention and protection. Obviously, the point of view depends on the place we live, and we have Poland, Portugal, Colombia, and Slovakia as an interest of, direct interest of Jerónimo Martins, but I can bet that you are somebody who is working globally, because the suppliers are not only from here. Just closely, mostly public lands in Poland, so we want to take out of this forest as much as possible for society, not necessarily for the economics, because people are not the owners of the forest. But there is no way to, let's say, save Polish forests from deforestation, because law doesn't allow it, and 80% of the public ownership guarantees that the policies can be passed, policies for protection or let's say active protection can be passed through the forest. But still, because of the climate change, we have to go into the conversion of forests to something which is more resilient, to keep forests accessible for the society, and this is, let's say, the perfect picture of the forest which is liked by Polish people, because we are very keen on mushroom picking and simply going to the forest for other reasons. We don't like cutting trees. I mentioned this 21% of Poles that don't believe that you have to cut the tree to produce something from the wood. We are not very keen on hunting, although we like venison and other meat from game animals. Again, another example of detachment. Touristic and beautiful landscapes, this is something we are very keen on. If it comes to something which is more wilder, this is something we can accept, but going into strict protection, like Białowieża forest, Stefano mentioned, well, everybody wants to have it, but nobody is going to go there because it's unpleasant to walk. Portugal, actually, is a good example of the country that has a lot of personal touch to the value of the forest, because 90% is private. As you can see, there are many about, or approximately, here, well, because simply we don't know how much forest and how much private and public forest we have, not only in Portugal, but generally in many places. But what's here is that we are talking about forest, 3.3 million hectares, and we are talking also about so-called other woodlands, and this is something you know from Portugal, from the landscape. Almost half a hectare per capita. Very difficult to coordinate all the actions in terms of protection, in terms of conservation, because simply this is a private property. So this is something which is extremely difficult for the government and for the organizations to go with, and that makes it prone to some other actions. Yeah, we have oaks, we have natural stands, also comprising of not only oaks but also pines. We have also many plantations, and this is probably one of these directions in Portugal, which is kind of dangerous and worth looking at, that it's loss of the biodiversity, increased risk of fires. In Colombia, it's actually another story because we are talking about a huge amount of forest, which is mostly public, but majority of this forest belongs to the communities. So basically, there is a very important part local communities to play in terms of protecting the forest and living out of the forest, very important part. And especially that because Colombia lies in a big extent in this area, which is very green on the map from European Space Agency and very red on the ecological values of these areas. So we have the tropical forests, we have forests from the mountains, we have also mangroves, very high value forests. We have many places where there is an interlacing of different functions like this plantation in the forest here, but we also count on, look at this kind of problems like plantations that are problematic from the point of view of protection of the forest. Slovakia is similar to Poland, so I am sorry to skip it fast. Simply the share of public land is much smaller. Otherwise than that, we are more or less in the same place. Yeah. This is about impressions, but yeah, this is something I wanted to say. The total scale of the forests we have in the world is 4 billion hectares of forests. It's about 31% of the total land area, 0.5% per one person, one football field per person. But there's a very important number. The forest loss last year, 6.7 million hectares of forest, which is twice as much as Portugal has, or 2/3 of what Poland has, a yearly loss. But if you look at the distribution of places where the problem exists, we have European countries that basically have no problem of losing the forest. The Portugal is a little bit difficult because of the switch between, let's say, plantations and then forestry. But the majority of the deforestation is in places with the tropical forests, including Colombia. Luckily, last year, the rate of deforestation in Colombia decreased by half as compared to the previous years, but this is still a lot of things to do. Yeah, so this is also the place we have to pay bigger attention to. So what are the main drivers? It has been already mentioned that the agriculture, but we have this message already passed here. 98% of Jerónimo Martins food distribution is more than 98% of Jerónimo Martins business. So this is why we have to take care of sustainable agriculture and take care of forests because they come from. But this kind of view or landscape is not bad. This is a plant you are going to talk today for quite a long time. It's a soybean. And if we are going to be aware of farming against trees, this is the picture of something we have to look at. Plantations, the same story, we know it, but again, this is the type of the plantation we have to be really aware of because of the rate of conversion of forest into these plantations, and I know that about palm oil we will be talking about later today. Urbanization has been already mentioned, and it's not too bad if it looks like this, but in many places, including Lisbon, for example, I was observing this vicinity of Lisbon when we're landing, when they look exactly the same like in Poland, in Kraków, Wrocław. Basically, the land is taken, mostly on the agricultural lands, less on the forest land, but still the urban sprawl is the problem in the developed countries. What are the solutions? Well, I have no clear answer to that because this is very local. And I'm really glad that there are some projects that will be presented here and some very specific topics we are going to talk about here, because I am not a specialist on agroforestry, but I would hear with pleasure a lot about these things. But if you look at the perspective of Central Europe, Slovakia, Poland, this is basically something we have to look at, not the forest themselves, but the area that are about forest. Because the typical landscape in Poland looks more or less like this. Sometimes the forest can be used for purpose of the sheltering the crops here with the vineyards. This is what we are observing. But this is something we lost over the last decades, that basically forests or trees in the fields play a very important role to protect land from desertification, to increase the humidity, these are so-called windbreaks, yeah? The belts of trees planted especially for protection of the forests, of the fields from different negative impact. And this is something I would really put more effort in this part of the world, to these windbreaks or shelter belts, because they also are a great reservoir of biodiversity. And we lost a lot of biodiversity because we simply went into more production in the large scale. The second thing, the silvopastoral systems, putting animals and plants together. We have heard about these proportions that really we produce a lot or too much to feed animals, but we can feed animals in more sustainable way, like here with this sheep kept in a more traditional way with trees, with the forest, and this is something we really can think of. A lot of potential in Portugal and countries of the region, because there is a long-lasting tradition of silvicultural or of agricultural, agroforestry or agroforestal solutions in this part of the country. And if we have this kind of landscape, you know, from Portugal, we can intensify this production by planting some crops between the rows, or keep animals in these silvopastoral systems. And this is something that is quite frequently used, and this is something that really we have put more attention to that. There are also other options or examples of keeping animals in the forest. This is from Brazil, from Paraná. We have the plantation with the cows. I would rather see forests with the cows than plantations with the cows, but this is still better than keeping them separately and losing forested or wooded area. Anyway, okay, so from the tropical countries' point of view, and there will be a panel or presentations about coffee or cocoa production, this is something we could also think of, that this mixture of use with a mosaic of different uses is something that is really worth mentioning and worth paying attention to. What are the tools? The Sustainable Development Goals have been already mentioned here, and there is no other way but simply go as a corporation towards it. And I know that Jerónimo Martins is very deep into SDGs. I checked different certificates. These are not only those or not this that exactly Jerónimo Martins goes with, but there are 3 certificates regarding the forestry part, and some examples of the agriculture part. Well, this is maybe not the best tool, but we have no better to go with if we want to assure that our activities are according to the nature. I really advise you to go deeper into this document. I have to say that this is one of the best prepared documents of such type I have ever seen. There is also a forestry part about palm oil, soy, paper and timber, beef, and multi-stakeholder initiatives. Great lecture, and this is something, once you are back from this conference, this is the lecture to take home. So the question to the Jerónimo Martins is, why are you involved in this activities towards nature, environment? And I heard from one of the Biedronka's employees, well, because we realize that we are able to make the difference. So that's something, again, to take as a message home. Because of the size, because of the scale of your activities, you can make a difference, especially through the direct impact to your employees, to your partners, and to your customers. If we are talking about 5 million people in Biedronka stores every day, there is a huge potential to do that. Can you do better? Absolutely. Just don't be humble, but simply spread the word about your activities toward nature, toward forests, and this will help you also to develop the business. Thank you very much.